So let's move on to the end of year process. So the first part was more towards, okay, here are your data. And now we're moving on towards the certification process. The assumption is all of your data are in CalPads. And we're moving on to the next phase of your data submission, which is the certification process, which essentially making sure that any certification errors have been resolved, any certification data discrepancies have also been resolved, and then reports are reviewed, and then the LEA and SELPA approves the different versions of the reports. So this is just a certification workflow that we created that at least would visualize what the next steps are in the certification process. So again, course, you have to submit all of your SPED data, your SPED, SSRV, clear all of your certification errors. And of course, in the process of clearing any of the errors, you also have to resubmit files into CalPads. Once those are cleared, you then review the reports. You have to involve all of your stakeholders that Nate included on that visual in the PowerPoint earlier in this training, and make sure that they are on board with regards to all of the different data elements that are reported for each student. So once you've ascertained that all of your data, at least on your LEA level, is accurate, then you can prove your certified reports, and then the SELPA will in turn review those reports and certify on their end. So I won't dwell into how to certify, how to review snapshots, because there are trainings, there are specific resources in CalPAS that would provide you that. In our CSIS YouTube channel, we have the snapshot and revision playlist. Just put that here. For those newbies would like to review and see how the certification process is. If you're new, if you've been entrusted this job in the middle of the year and you're clueless with regards to snapshot revisions and the process, then you could go to this website or to the YouTube video. Okay, so for the LA approval process, again, you have to go to your certification page. You have to have the necessary roles to be able to see this section. And then, of course, you have to look at all of the functionalities. The key elements with regards to end of year 3, end of year 4, fall 1, any of those submissions that involve a second approval from the SELPA is this section here, this revision ID, which I will discuss in a few minutes. So again, the user interface provides you the information of who your SELPA is. And then if you have certification errors, you have to resolve those. Once those are resolved, then you then move on to looking at your reports. So on the LEA side, you just have to go to end of year 4 and the certification errors. So there are changes in end of year certification error list. If you attended end of year advance that CI had yesterday, it was revealed that an updated error list with new CDDs in the process of being implemented in CalPads. So in your slides, as you can see, there are certification errors that you have to resolve, right? But the common errors here are based on the enrollments that Nate discussed earlier. Okay, so this is the reason why actually this training is more geared towards the data coordinator laying the groundwork so that your SPED folks would not encounter the errors that you might encounter during SPED submissions, right? Number one, you have to make sure that you establish the right enrollment types. Number two, you have to establish the right school of attendance. Because otherwise, if you make a mistake of reporting a preschool student as a 50, then of course you will get a CERT 145, right? So, or if you have, let's say, a student who should be reported as a private school, but you reported an IEP that is a SPED setting that is different, then of course you would get a specific error for that. So again, as a data coordinator, you have to make sure that your enrollments are correct, and that way your SPED coordinators would be able to report the data properly.
Well, I
Yes.
wanted to add, no, what you're looking for, Kyron was saying lay the groundwork. He was right. We had that table identified where what education plan a student should have. So if you look at CERT 145, it's a fatal error. And it said SPED record missing for a student enrolled at a private school. Well, you'll look at that student's record and see that there is a SPED record. The problem historically has always been it will be an IEP, not the proper. It doesn't say ISP, not reported for private school. It just says SPED record. So you have all these errors, and you scan over there. You see your LEA has reported an IEP. You said this student has a record. You need to know that the IEP is missing, or the special education coordinator needs to know what it looks like when it's presented in CalPADS so they can identify it. That's kind of reason why Kyron said the LEA data coordinator kind of leads the way, sets the groundwork for the SEDS data coordinator.
Yes. And then, of course, before even getting into the CVRs, into certification errors, you will encounter all of these new CDDs or NF4. Nate mentions some of the program setting codes and all of those age codes that he showed in the valid combinations document. So those and even enrollments. For example, here you have an invalid student age for transition services in IEP indicator, or student age must be between 0 to 20 years or old for this special education service provider. So all of this, number one, the student enrollment. Number two, the student demographics. Then of course, and the school of attendance and all of those data on the SIS side. So hand in hand with resolving your SPED and CVRs, you have to make sure that number one, you know where to look for. What resources you need to look for to troubleshoot this, and you have to be able to relay this message to your SPED person as well. So Flash 161 is a really good resource. And then of course below Flash 161, you have that link to the SPED student enrollment matrix, or I guess it's not here. But if you go to the CalPADS user manual, it should be on this side here, this part. So you have this matrix, you have CalPADS Flash 161. So the secret to CalPADS is not being able to know everything, just knowing where to look for. So there's a lot of resources. You could go to the Flash Communications. You could go to the FAQs. We had some questions earlier that could be answerable by just going to the special ed FAQs. So these are just the resources that you could take advantage of with regards to leading or pointing at least your SPED coordinator to the right resources and the right path in correcting all of the SPED records. Sometimes the SPED data is correct. It's just a matter of you having to reconfigure, having to readjust the school enrollments or any of the enrollment record data elements. So that's part of the certification error in resolving errors. Another thing is that when let's just assume you've resolved all of your errors and now you're looking at your reports. So another key element to communicating with your SELPA is this snapshot history, the revision ID. So see how in the LA view there is a revision ID. So when communicating with LA with your SELPA and let's say reviewing reports, you could send them an email and tell them, okay, this is the LA approved version that you should be looking at. This is the revision ID. Sometimes your SELPA would say, okay, you are LA approved, but then I think there are some mistakes in your data. So here you are, rather than decertifying or disapproving your record, you just upload a correction. So there would be another revision line in here that would say, okay, so there could be a LA approved version here, and then you have a new revised uncertified. When you try to relay that message to your SELPA in terms of how to review reports, it is important that you indicate the revision ID and what revision status they need to look at. Because on the SELPA side, when they review reports, I mean, one is SELPA approved, or LA approved, but then if you need to make corrections, by default, Berkeley Unified on the SELPA side will come up as a SELPA approved. So if you are telling your SELPA that, hey, could you please the revised uncertified version of report because you wanted some correction. So you have to provide them the revision ID and of course the revision status that they need to look at. Okay? The new this year on the SELPA side is that they are able to see if you have fatal errors. So last year, SELPAs aren't aware of where you are in your certification errors. This year, they are able to see the fatal errors that you are in. So that way they would be able to help you in terms of maybe trying to make the deadline or at least assist you with logistics in terms of providing you additional input with regards to resolving issues in CalPES. Okay. Okay. So I guess this does not apply to all, but then again, this would really help in terms of communicating to SELPA should they need to be able to look at the proper certification version, that snapshot version that they need to look at. So that's just for the certification process. There are resources in CalPads. You could go to the user manual. There are a lot of resources that you could refer to in terms of the functionality and then also with the YouTube channel with regards to the snapshot certification. But for end of year, the bottom line is you need to know the resources where to point your SPED coordinator or your SELPA or whoever is trying to correct certification errors. That way, you are in sync and essentially you know where they are at with regards to the SPED certification. Okay, so for those who have their own SPED coordinator, so again, it's you, the SPED coordinator, and the SELPA who needs to collaborate and talk to each other with regards to this. You don't just wait. I mean, I know you've done your part with regards to other end of year submissions. Let's say you're done with end of year 2, you're done with end of year 1. Those two don't rely on the SELPA. And so with that, just because you're done with that and you're just waiting for your SELPA to approve end of year 3 or 4, that doesn't mean you just be sitting there and just let your SPED person or let the SELPA person figure it out. You have to coordinate. I mean, it's just me generalizing. There are different scenarios or situations that you guys are in. I understand that. However, the best way to go through this is cooperation between all fronts. Okay, okay, so again, we have your certification errors you need to resolve. Then, of course, you need to review the report, send it to all stakeholders involved for their approval. And then, of course, we move on to the SELPA side. So on the SELPA side, once they have their dashboard will look like this, except this one doesn't have the error column, but essentially you will be able to see all of the districts that they handle and they need to approve for. So if you're a charter school and you're associated to El Dorado Charter, you probably have around 100 or more. Okay, so there is this dashboard that they need to look at and approve for each of these LEAs. So another thing is that if you are a charter school and of course you are in under a SELPA that has a lot of LEAs to handle, it would really also be best to start early and be able to approve your data early. That way they can look at your information and be able to put you ahead of everyone else in terms of approvals and review of the reports. Okay. Again, this is me generalizing. I know there are different LAs that may have different circumstances, but for you to be able to meet the deadline of July 28th for the certification deadline, for you to be able to have you and yourself approve it, then it's best to have your data ready and have your SELPA and SPED folks involved in this process as early as possible. That I if there are any questions on the approvals, I pass on the mic to Nate for the remaining presentation.